You're listening to a Reykjavík Grapevine podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the final episode of The Last Viking Mystery. I'm currently sticking my head into some sort of an ice cave opening. We're in an ice cave. And, I don't know, I think Valur is somewhere around here. Valur?
Yeah.
You're here.
I'm here.
In an ice cave.
With all this ice. Yeah. You know, they say that Greenland is icy and Iceland is green. Iceland isn't all that green, but Greenland sure is icy.
Yeah, it is.
It's the second biggest chunk of ice in the world after Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
But it's getting smaller.
It is getting smaller.
It's melting away.
But during the period we are talking about, the 13th, the 14th century, 15th century, the ice was, well, the ice cap of the Greenland glacier was kind of adding to its mass.
It was getting bigger.
It was getting bigger and colder and just generally more hostile for the lifestyle that the Greenlandic Norse people were used to.
Yeah. Do you think that's what finally killed them off?
Bad lifestyle choices?
Bad weather. They were sort of used to bad weather, but then it got even worse.
Slowly it got worse, and it's sometimes if if it gets bad slowly enough, maybe you don't really have that eureka moment where you realize you have to do something to change your ways of living.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's one theory.
Life was certainly getting harder by the 13th, 14th centuries. But how does a society just disappear? What is the last person thinking, like, oh, this is getting worse every year? Did they try to do something to save themselves?
Yeah, did they do that, or did they just sort of die out of apathy?
Do you think this is the throne of the last Viking chieftain of Greenland?
It's magnificent, but your ass gets cold pretty fast here. Do you want to try it?
Huh.
You also look the part way more than I do.
Yeah, maybe it was just getting too uncomfortable
to stay
in Greenland.
But what would you do? Would you just lie down and die, or would you try to make an escape, move elsewhere, migrate? Or have you completely lost sort of that flair that your people had to migrate to migrate out of there again?
Yeah, I mean this is 500 years. This is a long time, and by about the midpoint, it starts to get colder. So you wonder, did people always say, "Oh, I remember before when everything was nicer"? Mm-hmm. Is that how stories are passed down? Did they hope that it would eventually become better again, and then it just didn't?
I mean, the whole experience about living in Iceland and sort of experiencing the seasonal cycle of weather is that you're always hoping. The only thing you have is hope that it actually gets better, and the last summer was terrible, but you kind of hope that the next one will be better. Maybe it's just the same thing, that sort of hope that has made it possible for us to stay here for 1,200 years is what perhaps got the Greenlanders in trouble.
Yeah.
They should have stopped hoping and gotten the hell out of there.
Yeah.
Well, Valur, we should probably admit to the fact that we're not in Greenland.
Yes, that time comes in every Icelander's life when we must accept the fact that we are in fact not in Greenland.
We have to accept the fact that we're actually in Iceland.
Yeah.
So we didn't have the budget to go to Greenland, so we're just in the next best thing. We're in a man-made ice cave in the middle of Reykjavík, and let's get the hell out of that place. Out from the cold, into the cold. It's still damn cold.
Winter is coming, or summer, one or the other.
One or the other. This is where the man-made ice tunnel is kept, I guess. Do you keep an ice tunnel? I don't think you can keep an ice tunnel, but it's in there. This is This used to be the hot water storage things for the city of Reykjavík. Now it's more or less been turned into a museum. In between of those two areas of the building, a former mayor decided to build a restaurant that spins around on top of it. Gimmicky, but whatever. Anyway.
But the warm water, which was transported to here from the hot springs, and then it has enough elevation to go through all the houses in Reykjavík, which sort of makes Iceland livable, barely.
Barely, yeah.
But without which it would have been pretty terrible. You know, Reykjavík takes its name from the hot springs, the smoke coming out of the bay. But they didn't have that in Viking age, Middle Age Greenland. So it might have become pretty unpleasant.
Probably was. Probably was. I think we should move to a different location. More something that reminds us a little bit more about medieval farm life in Greenland, and which is to an extent similar to this place. Again, budget issues, and more or less sort of categorically try to go through the possible or the theories of the possible demise of the Greenlanders.
Yeah, where do you think they went off to?
East, west, not north.
Probably not north.
Maybe south. I would have gone to Tenerife.
Yes.
Or the Madeira Islands.
One theory even says that they did.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So Valur, we've been trying to find a backdrop here nearby Reykjavík that vaguely resembles Greenland.
Yeah, at least it is getting colder, which is representative of what happened to Greenland. So sometime after about 1260, possibly due to a volcano somewhere else, it started to get progressively colder.
Yep. And I guess that's, I mean, when it comes to discussing what happened to the Greenlanders, the main thing is to basically address that the weather change, at least, is whatever happened to them, the reason why they aren't there anymore.
Well, yeah, we know for sure that the weather did get worse, like it's doing right now. But what actually did people do? How did they cope? Well,
with the cooling of the area in general, like the Norse Greenlanders' way of living was under threat.
Yeah, the glaciers started getting bigger, which sort of squeezed them on one side, and it also made the land heavier, so there might have been a lot of flooding. So that's one issue.
Jesus Christ! What the fuck is this?
Yeah. How do you cope with the worsening weather? You just turn your back to it?
I guess so.
So one theory states that they were just so stubborn that they didn't actually do anything. And there are some artifacts to suggest that they were still wearing Parisian fashions into the 1400s. So they may have died due to fashion.
Due to the fact that everything around them was changing and they refused to change themselves, I guess.
Yeah, that is sort of a kind of a moralistic theory that they died because they were Europeans or because they were Christians and they refused to adapt. But I'm not entirely convinced, because they did survive for 500 years. So, so they were adaptable to in some ways. But one reason theory by me is just that there may actually have been another volcano in around 1450.
Yeah.
Which may have just made the weather turn bad so quickly. So this is not a gradual process over hundreds of years, but actually just in 2 or 3 years of complete crop failures and the weather getting ever colder, they may have just potentially lain down to die.
So, or maybe a combination of both. It had gradually gotten worse, and then it got really bad all of a sudden.
Yeah, then it just a sudden shock to the system.
But I mean, either way, like, it became sort of impossible to maintain their way of life there.
Yeah.
So this means that they may either have died out somehow,
Yeah.
or they may have moved away.
Yeah.
And whether, which way and how is... These are all various theories that have floated around.
Yeah.
One theory that was mildly popular in the beginning of the 20th century was Vilhjálmur Stefánsson, the Icelandic, Canadian Icelandic polar explorer.
Yeah.
Who maintained that the Norse Greenlanders had simply moved into the continent of North America and coexisted there with the other natives and taken up their lifestyle. And his theory was that there was some tribe of Inuits in North Canada that had sort of lighter features or something like that, and his theory was that these were the descendants of the Norse Greenlanders. I mean, that's one working theory. Another,
it's a very logical explanation, because they knew that North America was there. They probably still had boats to go there, and if they are freezing to death, it would make sense to go there. But the problem is that with new genetic research, no trace of them has been found.
No.
And if they had mixed with the Inuits, which apparently they did not at all, or with Native Americans, then this should have been able to be verified with modern technology. But nothing has been found where it's likely to be. One sort of neat theory is that they mixed with a tribe which itself died of plague in about 1830, and that's why we can't find them, because they did mix with the natives, but then they survived for another 300 years and then whoosh. Well, that's one theory. I mean, another theory is that in the late 15th century, the 16th century, the era of Europeans re-finding North America, some Spanish or Portuguese may have sailed to Greenland and simply enslaved the entire population and moved them south. Yeah.
Maybe moved them, or I don't know, maybe south to the Azores, to Madeira, to Tenerife or something. And as much as we like Tenerife, that kind of sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
But at the same time, no evidence supports that theory.
There is actually some evidence of the Vikings having gone to Tenerife.
Yeah, that's true, but that's a different...
But that's earlier,
yeah.
It's sort of nice if they had a happy ending, because there's nothing that Icelanders these days love more than to get a tan in Tenerife, and they just left and went south and sailed there. But yeah, we would probably have found remains. But the pirate theory is... there is actually a folk tale from the 18th century recorded by Hans Egde when the Danes came back to recolonize Greenland, or colonize it for the first time, that does speak of pirates, which may probably have been English, because they were sailing a lot in Icelandic waters at this time.
Yeah.
This was the time, sort of the beginning of the British Empire, when they were building better ships than the Vikings had. So it's sort of, I mean, the Vikings were raiding England. Maybe this is sort of the sort of just deserts that the English did trade in Iceland. They did also raid, and maybe they were all taken away. But no evidence of this has been found. And again, maybe DNA or something can prove this. But so far, there's even no direct evidence of them going to Greenland.
No, and I mean the lack of evidence, in itself doesn't prove anything, but it's still weirdly lacking in any evidence. So
yeah,
it's hard to...
It remains a conjecture, but it's an easy solution to why the whole settlement disappeared. But the settlement was spread out, so it also seems somewhat unlikely that they would sort of get everyone.
And then I guess there is the theory that they simply just sailed to Iceland again.
Yeah.
And
the one piece of evidence for this is that in 1347, this is the last Greenland ship that comes to Iceland, and some people claim that this was actually a part of an exodus. This is 100 years before the end of the settlement, but when the western settlement in Greenland is ending. Apparently the ship drifts off course, but it's possible that it may have been there on purpose. But Icelanders at this time obsessively documented everything. Like if Sigga on the next farm broke a bucket, this was because to write down, in the histories, Sigga broke a bucket. So all hundreds of people moving from Greenland to Iceland,
that would have been put on the record.
Mentioned at some point. So now the summer's out. This is typical spring in Iceland, or any season in Iceland. We've had hail, we've had sun, we have wind, we have...
all kind of at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, the 15th century in Iceland was miserable too. There was Black Death, and there was also a lot of ice here. It was getting a lot colder than there were English pirates. But Icelanders survived, whereas the Greenlanders at the time did not. There were the Black Death in Iceland was really bad. It killed about half the people. There is a theory that it went to Greenland, but it doesn't really add up because the last documented story from the Greenland settlement was of a wedding in 1408, but Black Death here was ended in 1404. So it probably didn't get over. But it's hard
to tell.
Yeah.
I think we've... I mean, the idea that the whole population successfully migrated elsewhere seems rather implausible, at least to me.
Even though there was a lot of free land in Norway and Iceland, which were both decimated by Black Death, the stories would have been passed down.
Somebody would have known.
Yeah.
Somebody would have said something. It seems.
Yeah.
But this disruption brought by the Black Death, it might very likely have disrupted travel between Greenland and Iceland and Norway.
This we know for sure because Norway was really badly hit by Black Death, and so they stopped sending ships to Greenland.
And one wonders whether or not that kind of coincides in time with Greenland was their biggest sort of the reason why people would trade up here was for like stuff like walrus tusks.
Yeah.
Who also at the same time sort of became less in demand.
Yeah, there are actually some theories suggest that it was more of a supply side problem. The Norse no longer were going up to Norðurset in the far north. They were no longer catching walrus, and there was more difficulty transporting them. And the Norwegian market may have collapsed simply because Norway collapsed sort of at the time.
Yeah, and you have this at the same time. You're going to have this sort of collapse in Norwegians doing their own trade, and you kind of have the Hansa League moving in.
Yeah.
And maybe this just kind of the whole sort of trading system kind of collapsed.
Yeah.
Similar to what we're having with tariffs or something right now, where like the whole system we've been used to for the past decades is kind of just seems to be on a verge of taking a massive turn to something else.
Yeah, so this actually could have destroyed the whole civilization because there was still actually Norway was taken over by Denmark in 1397, and Denmark is more faced towards Germany, towards the Baltic, so Norway was faced towards the Atlantic, so it's got isolated, and the whole sort of network of going to the north of Greenland for walrus tests, moving them to the south and then to Norway was broken. And there was still a royal monopoly, though, so nobody else was technically allowed to trade, and people were prosecuted very strictly for that. So Icelanders weren't technically allowed to trade with Greenland. Some seem to. So, yeah, this is sort of maybe a little bit how tariff may have destroyed the settlement.
Trading policies may have had
from the Star Wars prequels to medieval Greenland to the Trump administration. It's always about trading rights somehow.
Yeah. Well, that kind of leaves. Let's work with that scenario. Like trade or travel kind of falls through due to a mixture of factors we've already discussed.
Yeah.
People still live there. What do they do? I mean, if the ships stop coming and they have all those necessities they need, like iron tools, whatever else they were transporting, corn, foodstuffs.
They did turn over to eating seal a lot, so they could have subsisted. I mean, the big picture's pretty clear. Trading got worse, weather got worse, life got worse, but none of it really explains how a settlement of 3,000 to 5,000 people, I mean, gets smaller, but how it ends. How does a civilization, almost a whole community, die out? I mean, one possibility is sort of Noah's Ark type scenario, that they were still able to build ships, but not very sturdy ones. They all got on board a boat, and they just sank on the way to Iceland, to North America, and there would be no trace of this. Maybe sometime in the future, when we can examine the ocean floor, we can see the last Greenland ship. But we do know, according to the sagas, that of the 25 ships who went to Greenland, only 14 made it, and that was during a much warmer period than this. So
like we discussed in the first episode of this, given how difficult it was to get to Greenland, it is mildly, it's not implausible that if there was let's put it this way, in the middle of the 20th century, a community in a part of the Westfjords since abandoned, Hrafnseyri. No, not Hrafnseyri, sorry, never mind. They all got together and they had a vote whether or not to stay and maintain the town there and the community, and they voted to not do that. Hesteyri is where I'm talking about.
Okay.
And they just decided to move and close shop.
Yeah.
So it's, the whole idea that the community got together and thought, things are getting pretty dark here. Doesn't really, the way we like to do things isn't really working out. The harvest is bad. Let's just leave. Might have happened, and it might have ended this way. I guess you can also, instead of one big event that ends the life of everybody there, it could have been something less drastic or less sort of, smaller events. It could have been, let's say, if communication with Iceland and Norway had kind of ended, and the Greenlanders themselves maybe didn't have a lot of ships. One storm might have kind of taken out the ships, and they couldn't have gotten away at all either, and then this would have been sort of like a longer decline process, where things are getting worse and they're not maybe adapting to a changed climate. They're not trying to figure out new ways of subsiding. Where sort of drifting into apathy and then disappearing.
Possibly they could have just laid down to die one by one. It's not impossible. I mean, there's one uncomfortable theory. It's particularly uncomfortable because it was used sort of as a justification for Danish colonization. It is not impossible that the Inuit who were coming south at the time,
the
Thule people, because at the beginning there were no Inuit in southern Greenland, but they were coming south at the time. They may have killed off the last remaining survivors. I mean, I don't think that there was kind of an attack and all-out war, but there are some accounts of fights, and the Norse, they and
those accounts survive in folklore.
But there was written down by the Danes who sort of were looking for them, so they may have sort of imposed them in a way, and some of them may have been in other Inuit groups. So that's a possibility. But actually, interestingly, the last story from Greenland is from 1540, where a man was found who was dressed in half Inuit, half European clothes, and that may have been the last Greenlander, that they somehow survived on this very tiny edges of society, and then the last one died in the
16th century, basically. It's, I guess, to an extent, this will always remain a mystery.
Maybe we should just go and enjoy the spring weather that's finally coming out, and I'd be grateful that so far we're not the last Icelanders, but maybe climate change and new trade policies will make life unsustainable here.
A lot more difficult than it has been recently.
So we found ourselves a log to sit on, which would have been a rarity in Iceland because there were really any forests or trees to speak of, nor were there in Greenland. Although as a teenager I was actually put to work planting trees here.
Yeah.
So yeah, this was a problem for the Greenland settlement, but there was also a lot of driftwood, so they could get wood, and they would go to Canada to collect wood. So it's possible that they may have been able to build ships to sail away from, and maybe they did.
Maybe they did, maybe they didn't.
Let's hope they did.
But on this lock, we can lock out of the story.
You were building up to that.
Oh shit, that was a bad one. Sorry about the joke. Yeah, I think well, it's been fun, Valur. It's always fun hanging out with you. In a perfect world, we would have concluded this with a revelation that we had figured out how the Greenland Norse settlement ended.
Yeah.
But just like everybody else, we just do simply not know how it ended, why it ended specifically.
But I am working on a book which may have something more to contribute. We'll see. You
will have your own theories, your own thesis on.
I will work with the ones we have.
All right.
For further the ones we have put forth here.
I look forward to it. And until we figure out a way to formalize a new thing we can talk about and shoot podcasts and videos on.
Yeah.
This is the end.
For now. We were talking about doing something about World War II. We have to sort of get that in before World War III begins. So.
Yeah, and unless we do that fairly soon, we might be too late.
Yeah.
And I mean, nobody wants to be covering World War III.
Yeah, World War II.
Also a couple of historians shouldn't be covering an ongoing World War, should they?
No, we should be taking notes for after.
The future, yeah. Well, it was great being with you guys. Thanks for watching and listening. And I guess until whatever the hell comes next.
Yeah.
Nice knowing you. Bye bye. Oh, it's cold.